It is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome all of you to the presentation today by Ambassador Emilio Rabasa Gamboa, who is Mexico's ambassador and permanent representative to the Organization of American States, a position he has held since July of 2013. I can personally testify that our speaker has at least three relevant qualifications for this event. First of all, he is a lawyer descended from lawyers. Secondly, he's a diplomat descended from diplomats. And thirdly, as demonstrated on the highway coming down from Chicago today in a bit of a blizzard, he is a man who has all the courage that it will take to face the questions that you may put to him at the conclusion of his talk. His grandfather was the long-standing, during decades, legal advisor to the Mexican foreign minister. His father decided to outdo his grandfather and became the foreign minister and fired his grandfather. Or maybe they just thought it would be a better idea to have a new legal advisor. He has his own qualifications, of course, as you might imagine. He got his law degree from the National University of Mexico in Mexico City. He then got a master's in political philosophy from Cambridge University in England, then came back to the National University of Mexico Law School, where he pursued and obtained his doctorate with a thesis on new approaches to constitutionalism. He is now, and this is something that I wish the United States could learn from the practice in Mexico, where leading academic researchers also tend to occupy leading positions in the Foreign Service. He is now a tenured researcher in the Instituto de Investigaciones Jurídicas, the Institute of Legal Research, which is the leading legal think tank in Mexico, and I would say in Latin America. It's also part of the National University of Mexico. I have a particular interest in that instituto since I'm going to be there for the first 6 months of next year, working with some of the researchers there on a Fulbright. Prior to becoming Mexico's ambassador to the Organization of American States, he held a number of positions in government and state institutions of Mexico. Importantly for our purposes, he was the senior advisor to the first Commissioner of Human Rights in Mexico, Minister and Ambassador Jorge Carpizo, a longtime friend of everybody who fights for human rights in Mexico and Latin America. He was also the Secretary General of the Mexican Institute of Social Security, and in Mexico, Social Security doesn't just mean payments in the event of old age or disability. It also is in charge of the health insurance system for people who are employed in the private sector. He was also, from 1990 to 1998, while in the Ministry of Governance of Mexico, the coordinator of dialogue and negotiations in Chiapas, Mexico, with the Zapatistas. So he has broad experience in diplomacy, law, democracy, human rights, and peace negotiations. And I think this young man has a promising future career, and it will be very interesting to see where it might take him. He will speak to us today, of course, about the Organization of American States at a time of transition. The OAS is of great importance to many people in this room because it is the organizational parent of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And of late and presently, it is under a great many challenges, of which the ambassador will speak. And so both the topic and the guest speaker are important, and we're really privileged to have you here, and thanks very much for braving the snow to come down here, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all, to Doc Cassell for making possible for me to be here at Notre Dame. It's certainly a well-known university in Mexico and abroad, but in which I hadn't been before, and I was very much looking forward to this, and for several reasons. Well, first of all, the reputation it has in social sciences, particularly in law and international relations, understanding and human rights, for me was very appealing. Secondly, during my master's degree in Cambridge, which was at the political science faculty, I kept reading Guillermo O'Donnell for a lot of reasons, because the theme was democratization in the late 20th century. I was interested in trying to understand how come more or less 30 countries have moved from various types of authoritarian regime to various types of democracies in what Huntington called the third wave of democratization. And that was the reason why I went to Cambridge to study that process. And lots of light was thrown to me by reading Guillermo O'Donnell. And I knew he was a scholar here who just recently, unfortunately, passed away. So I wanted to know also very much the place where he had lived and wrote very important, inspiring texts. And certainly another motive was the beauty of the campus, and I don't think that the snow has even prevented me from enjoying it, but on the contrary, it has given me a different outlook of your campus. So thank you very much, Doc, really, for making this possible. I met just once before, Doc, in a conference in Washington was that at the Atlantic or the World? Inter-American Dialogue. And when he said that he was teaching here, I approached him and said, "Can I go to your university?" And well, this was done here. So I'm really very, very thankful to you and taking the trouble of getting me in Chicago and bringing me here, and quite enjoyed the trip. I had a reading paper, but I'm not going to read because I believe more in like face-to-face, and I believe more in dialogue and talking. And so I like to leave sufficient space for the questions, answers that you might have at the end. And I think that is even much more interesting than the remarks that I could make. So the theme that I think that the text was very, very well chosen by Doc, the transitional moment of the OAS, because it is precisely what is undergoing there. So I'm going to divide my remarks in two parts. One part, a sort of a macro overview of the OAS as it's standing now in this transitional moment. We just the past week elected a new Secretary General, confirmed Mr. Almagro as the sole competitor from Uruguay, and elected the Assistant Secretary General. Between Belize and Guyana, we decided to go for Belize, but that was a true election. And then just the next day, on Thursday, we had this very awkward and peculiar Permanent Council meeting on the Venezuela issue. And I'd say awkward and peculiar because the Venezuelans have, for long standing, trying to avoid the OAS as a forum to discuss their situation. Just last year, we had a strong debate over bringing the issue of Venezuela to the OAS, and eventually did, but with great pains from their representative. But this time, they were the ones who asked for this extraordinary meeting of their council, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It was very interesting. And then the next day, just Friday, so it was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, it's very fresh on my mind, we had these hearings, the public hearings of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission of the OAS. You know that you all, I believe, are familiar with that as postgraduate students of human rights. There are two types of meeting: the public hearings that can be attended by anyone, and this one, believe me, the ones, well, I don't know about the other countries, but the ones of Mexico were packed with people because of forced disappearance, the Ayotzinapa case, and lots of press, protesters outside. And then the private ones, which we held 6 on Saturday, on a specific follow-up topics where there has been an agreement to overcome the grievances that were caused to the victims. So it was really a hard week, a tough week, and I'm also for that reason thankful to Doug and to you to be present here and to pull me out of Washington and bring me here to Chicago, which is a city that I like very much, particularly the jazz places, and be here with you. So I'll start about the OAS in general terms, and then I'll move on to the particular case of human rights and this inter-American system on human rights and what the troubles are. I said that the OAS is in transition because not only we just selected a new Secretary General, again from South America. There has only been Secretary Generals from South America: Colombia, Chile, Argentina, now Uruguay, except for a very brief period of a Secretary General from Costa Rica, which lasted something like a couple of months, and then he was sued in his own country and charged with different violations, and so he had to resign and get back to Costa Rica. But otherwise, it's always been from the South. Many people thought that this tendency would change now, but no, it was confirmed. But what's really having the OAS in a transition, I think, is in two ways. First, in regards to itself and its own administration and its own way of doing things as an international organization. And secondly, and most important, about other international organizations, multilateral, who have spread in the continent after the OAS was created in the Bogota Charter of 1948. And I'm thinking about UNASUR, I'm thinking of Mercosur, I'm thinking of CELAC, I'm thinking of CARICOM in the Caribbean, etc. So when the OAS was born, it was only the OAS in the continent. It was only 21 member states, as you know, and then eventually Canada signed in, and all the Caribbean, and now it became 35 member states until, with the Cuban Revolution, and except with the vote of Mexico, Mexico was the only one that voted against, it was expelled from the OAS in the 60s. And then all countries broke relations except Mexico with the OAS. So when I was telling Doc that when my ALBA, you are familiar with the ALBAs? You are? These member countries, left-wing countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Ecuador, who are all left-wing governments. They are called the ALBA group. And now they are strong supporters of Cuba. And but even before the United States established relationships with Castro regime, they would come to me and tell me about different things about Cuba, and I tell them, don't try to teach me about Cuba, I'll teach you about Cuba, because we were the only country that didn't break relations with them. And it was in 1990 that they reversed that decision to welcome Cuba again, but of course the Cubans said no thanks. Now there might be a possibility, and everyone is talking about the return of Cuba to the OAS, and that would make things, tensions at least, only better, because we are having a internal division between these ALBA group countries, and sometimes supported by Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and United States and Canada on the other side, and then the rest of us in the middle, creating a not so strong check and balance with the group, with the countries from the Atlantic, which are Peru, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. So things started to change, I would say, in the OAS like 5 years, 6 years ago, when there was certain discontent inside the organization on the ways things were being handled. For example, in human rights, the member countries weren't satisfied with the proceedings of the Commission and on the court. So there was a sort of an ad hoc group that would concentrate on proposing new rules of procedures in ways of handling claims, the time to respond, precautory measures, etc. And Mexico presided over that group, which ended in 2013. And I think it was a much advance in that sense. But other areas of the organization remain untouched, particularly areas such as the administration itself of the organization, and the most unfortunate of all, the quota system. I think we have been for a long time having what I call a perverse quota system, where 4 countries, the United States, Brazil, Canada, and Mexico, pay for 98% of the regular budget, and 30 countries for the 2% of the regular budget. I was telling Doug in the road coming here that for some Caribbean members, it is more expensive to pay the rent of their limousine in Washington than its quota to the OAS. So this is something that should have been dealt with a long time ago. As you know, the OAS lives out of 2 budgets which run together. One is the regular budget made up of the quotas. We're talking about an 80 million general terms budget. And then there is a parallel budget out of a specific funds that each country grants to the organization for specific programs. But it leaves out of the regular fund. And there isn't any room at all. Every penny, every dollar that goes into it is spent in paying salaries, providers of services, of materials. There isn't any way for a reserve, which should have been created some time ago, to meet situations like the one we are meeting now. It's so critical that just a week ago, we only had financement to pay salaries until April. Since April, we would have to get a loan to pay salaries. That badly shaped is the finance of the organization. If it wasn't because Canada and Mexico decided to pay in advance their quota, and that sort of equilibrated the finance of the institution until June, when Almagro will step into office. No reserves, and I think that an organization, whether international, public, private, even a family who has to go to loans to pay salaries, it's badly administrated. But that's the situation because the quota system has been untouched for so much time. And it has been untouched because governments don't believe in putting more money into an organization that they don't believe in. that they think it hasn't been modernized, it hasn't been updated, it's not completely sensible to the issues of the hemisphere. So that situation came into a crisis in around September of 2013, when the member states stood up and said, enough, we are not going to take more political decisions through the budget. We have to take political decisions first and then set the budget to those political decisions, but not the other way around. Because every year in October, the budget is discussed in the organization. And every year, the budget priorities would single out the political decisions of the organization, instead of first acknowledging the political objectives, where is the OAS heading, and then accommodating the budget to the organization. So they decided to create a working group, which was called the Working Group for the New Strategic Vision. I had just been 3 months since presenting my diplomatic credentials to Mr. Insulza, and in a meeting, my friend of Paraguay supported the candidacy of Mexico to preside the group. And I was elected as president of the working group for the strategic vision, with very, very little expectation that something would be achieved. The reason being that already Mr. Insulza had tried to get this strategic vision through the OAS and had failed. So why a just 3-month recently appointed ambassador would be able to do so? So when I met with a group of ambassadors for lunch just the day after I was appointed, and all of them said, well, we are sorry to tell you, but I don't think you'll be able to make it. I came into an agreement with them, which I called the Cervantes Agreement. I said, let you be the Sancho Panzas who tell me the real thing, and let me be the Quixote who has some idealistic attitude, because otherwise I don't think I'll be able to do this work the right way. And because imagine trying to get 35 countries as far distant as the first power in the world, United States, 300 million inhabitants, and Dominica, 75,000 people, and they all sit on the same table and have the same vote. There is no other international organization so horizontally acknowledged as the OAS. There is no Security Council. There is not a single body, and the presidency of the Permanent Council is rotated in alphabetical order every 3 months. So it was quite difficult to get together the Caribbean with their own interest, with the Central Americans with their own interests and with their own issues, and with the South Americans with their own concerns, and United States and Canada. So the way I thought it would work was to openly invite all of them into this group and openly discuss the central issues of the organization. And I made a first document 2 months later, which was called The Strength and Weakness of the OAS, because I do not accept also this, some critics' position that say that the OAS is no good for anything, that it's just an organization that is not working. That's not true. Whenever there is a conflict, for example, the conflict in the borders of Belize and Guatemala, they go to the OAS and they talk and it resolves. When the Argentinians need a support for the problem of the payment of their foreign debt, they go to the OAS and they require the support of the countries. And about differences between Chile and Bolivia for the access to the sea, they go to the OAS. So it is a forum where issues are discussed. It is a forum where programs are working with good results. For example, the drug problem. The drug program is one, I think, of the best programs of the organization. The drugs program, through the establishment of tribunals for the treatment of drug addicts, in considering them not as delinquents, but rather as sick people, and treat them as such, but with the support of justice. I think that's a great program in the OAS. And I could mention other examples as well. There is another program calling the judicial facilitators, where the courts in the countries train people as judicial facilitators to go to remote places to solve mainly civil or mercantile conflicts, but erase tensions from those communities who don't have access to the normal justice because of the distance. So there are many problems. There are the programs to fight cybernetic terrorism, known as 60, is also a working program. So there are many, the MOES, Misiones de Observación Electoral, that is the observer's mission to elections in different countries. Just this year, we had around 14 elections that were observed by the OAS, and it has gotten a great deal of attention from the governments to receive that mission, and always presided by an ex-president or a very well-known person in the continent, and they have brought a great deal of good practices in preparing an election, holding an election, and qualifying an election. And I think that now the MOES in democracy is one of the best programs of the OAS. And I could mention many of them. So there are many things that work well in the organization, and there are other things like this quota system who work pretty bad. So this is why I believe that the organization is undergoing a transitional moment. Eventually, my Sancho Panza friends were wrong, and the Quixote's idealism matured into a resolution in Asunción, Paraguay, adopted by full membership, by acclamation, where 4 pillars of the organization were recognized: democracy, human rights, multidimensional security, and integral development as the main central objectives of the OAS in face of 21st century. So these are the main concerns. So the organization will be dedicated fully to these 4 pillars and disregard other programs that just took resources and time consuming of the organization. And then there was another a resolution approved in another extraordinary assembly in Washington, D.C. on September of last year, where the means to achieve those objectives were also discussed and approved. So that gives Mr. Almagro now a new base to start, for a new start of the OAS. His concern and his compromise during his campaign is to acknowledge the strategic vision that was approved by member states and to implement it. And of course, he's going to face hard time in doing so, because implementation could be the cornerstone of the whole reform. But there is no way around if we really want to make the organization a strong organization in the hemisphere. Otherwise, we will only let these other organizations like the CELAC or like the UNASUR be the forums where the central issues be discussed by head of states, but without having any administrative or programmatic support as the OAS has. So I think Mr. Almagro's challenges are twofold. One is financial, is economic, to arrange the quota system, to make medium-sized countries such as, let's say, Peru, Colombia, Argentina, raise their quotas. Even the Caribbean ones also raise them a little bit. And then have a new equilibrium in the quotas and find a way for healthy finance in the organization. As one of my directors when I was working, Doug mentioned it, in the Social Security Institute, administration, financial health might not be an end in itself. When they were criticizing the technocrats in the government in Mexico because they were concerned about this financial health, that it might not be an end in itself, but it is a medium to political ends. If you don't have sound finance, then you will not achieve political ends. So I think that's one of his main issues, which he will have to face immediately. And for that, he will have to use certain of his political capital. But that's what the posts are for, not just to keep it without doing things. And the second one is political. And that is to bring the organization to terms in itself at the inside to try to close down the division between the ALBA group, the United States and Canada on the other side, the Caribbeans, and the rest of the countries, and get along to work together towards this end. That's a political issue. And the other political issue is, of course, the proper coordination with this other organization like UNASUR, like Mercosur, in ways that we don't have to face competition. After all, we are, as I had said it many times in the OAS, sons of the same father, because those organizations are created exactly by the same governments that created and support the OAS. So it might be a difference of age of brothers, but we are all from the same parents. So there shouldn't be a competition around it, but rather a collaboration. Other issue that Mr. Almagro will have to face is what I call the disintegration of the inter-American system. And by that I mean that the components, which is not only the OAS, but it's the OAS, it's PAHO, the health organization, it's the Inter-American Development Bank, which it is the financial creature of the OAS, and the ICA, the Agriculture Institute, the four of them, live and work separately. There isn't a joint meeting of the secretaries of these bodies to face specific hemispheric problems. And here during the time I presided over this group, I was very, very straightforward to my friends from the Caribbean. Caribbean are more interested, rather than democracy and human rights, as it is logical to assume, on integral development. They are much concerned about issues and programs related to development. There is no way the OAS can tackle that problem alone. It has to do so together with the other agencies, particularly the Inter-American Development Bank. But the Inter-American Development Bank, although a creature from the OAS, has grown up more strongly than all the rest, and financially healthy, of course, and looks its own way and lives its own life. So it will be Mr. Almagro's also concern to bring together these four agencies and establish common goals, particularly in the pillar of integral development. Now, there is now a good occasion to bring this puzzle together, and that's in the 3 weeks time summit. We are going to have the Summit of the Americas in Panama. For the first time, 35 head of states will meet in Panama. And when I say for the first time, I mean particularly Mr. Obama and Mr. Raul Castro will be sitting in the same table. I think that picture of the handshake will be global in the moment it's taking, and everyone is waiting for that, because before the United States and Cuba decided to establish relationships, there was all concerned whether Cuba would go attend or the United States would attend if Cuba went. And the ALBA group countries said, if Cuba does not attend, then we will not attend. So there was division, and there would be no summit. Once the relationship was established, and once they both confirmed that they will attend the summit, then we will have a huge summit in Panama, which could be a historic one if they really put on their caps and think about the main hemispheric issues. Security, terrorism, narcotraffic, the drugs problem, insecurity, poverty, inequality, threats to democratic governance. These are the central issues of the hemisphere, and certainly human rights. And I'll come back to human rights in a moment. So if we can get these head of states to think in the terms of the proposed menu by the host country Panama, that is to tackle the central issues that are refraining from a more healthy and rapid economic growth and social development in our country, notwithstanding that we have grown tremendously in the last 10 years or so, then we will have a great meeting. What was the concern in the Venezuela meeting the other day? The concern was that once more, as it happened in the summit meeting of Cartagena de Indias, Colombia, 4 years ago, where everything was on the Cuba issue, and Cuba had the central attention of that meeting. Now the Venezuela case will be centralized to the summit, and therefore the other matters of social development will be disregarded. So that is why that meeting was important. It was called by the Venezuelans to present what they call an alert to the rest of the continent because of Mr. Obama's decision of the Executive Act to declare that Venezuela was a threat to the United States. A very unfortunate language. The representative of the United States explained, and we knew even before, that that was the kind of term it had to be used to apply this law that prevents the United States from giving visa to, in this case, were 9 human rights violators in Venezuela, whom they declared non grata persona in the United States, and also to freeze some assets here in the financial system. Okay, we know it was a technical matter. Yes, it was a technical matter, which has been used, by the way, in many other countries, even in mine, and we don't consider it that we are a threat to the security of the United States. But it was wrongly used in the wrong moment. The timing was very, very bad for using that, because that fueled the situation in Venezuela. We all know that Venezuela is undergoing a profound crisis for many years now, but which has now become more critical, with long lines of people waiting to buy elementary foodstuffs and basic foods. We all know that the opposition has grown. We all know about the protests. So they needed this fuel from outside, and this is what that language provided. So the Venezuelans are now going to all the forums saying, this is a threat to our sovereignty, and this is the first step to the Marines' invasion of Venezuela and the destabilization of the Maduro regime. Of course, the United States responded in that council, said that's not the case. Obama is not thinking of sending the Marines to Venezuela, nor we are in the process of destabilizing. We just don't want to give visas to these people because they are human rights violators, and we want to freeze their assets here, that's all. But this is how maybe good things in bad moments produce different effects, and that was the case of that council. So what was the position of Mexico and of different countries, around 12? It was, first of all, we certainly welcomed that finally Venezuela brought the case to the OAS, and not only UNASUR or CELAC. Secondly, it was a very unfortunate language used by the United States. Third, get together, United States and Venezuela, and talk and dialogue to sort out these differences. Fourth, we acknowledge that Venezuela has offered true democratic elections for the renewal of their legislative body, and we'll be watching them. And fourth, let's not contaminate the summit. So that's now the standing of the situation vis-a-vis the summit, which will be in 3 weeks. We will see if the United States diplomacy moves toward sort of conciliation with the issue, so it will not be transported to the summit. Okay, having said that about the organization and its relationship with others, organization and the internal situation, I will now move to the human rights pillar in the organization. Human rights is a central pillar in the Inter-American system. I think it's one of the most prestigious mechanism that the organization has. The fact that, as I always mention it, and I just saw it 3 days ago, in a room, people who consider their human rights have been violated. Sometimes representatives, but sometimes the victims themselves can sit 3 meters from the state and tell face to the state, you violated my human rights in such and such and such way and such occasion, this way, etc., in front of the commission, is of great value. Is of great. I don't think I've ever seen, and I'm a lawyer, I practice law, a situation, a scenario where the victim sits right in front of the state and tell him face to face where his violation has occurred. With great courage, I am happy to say that most of the time it's young people who come here to represent the violations of human rights of other peoples, very well articulated, very well prepared, even to the extent, I was telling Doc coming here, that not a few times I would have preferred to be on the other side of the table rather than in this one. But this is how things are. On this occasion, I had to be the head of the delegation. Most of the time, the Undersecretary for Human Rights comes to Washington. This time, they decided I should head the delegation. It was a very difficult meeting, hearings. We faced the Ayotzinapa, the fathers of the Ayotzinapa boys outside in public protest outside the building. I think they had the right to be so. Reporters came to me when I entered through the main door, received shouts and said, are you annoyed about this? And I said, why should I be? It's their human right to protest, of public protest. I think they are doing the right thing. But the hearings were hard. They were hard. There were some mothers of people who had disappeared for many years. One's from Chihuahua, one's from Coahuila, northern states, the picture of their sons gone for so many years. And I couldn't help thinking, said, what would I do if I would had my daughter, I just have one daughter, disappear suddenly and no one would tell me where she or he is. I mean, besides going mad, I don't know what else would I do. So after one of the ladies, this was one from Guatemala who had lost a brother in the immigration hearing. There was a hearing on desaparición forzada. There was a hearing on the Guerrero situation of human rights. There was a hearing on migration, and there was a hearing on violence against women. So one woman from Guatemala said, what would you do if you've lost your brother? I lost my brother 12 years ago. I haven't heard of him. And he migrated to Mexico and I haven't heard from him. What would you do? And my only answer is, madam, I would be doing exactly what you are doing. So it's really a very, very distressful situation. But on the other side, it is very encouraging that we have this mechanism, which is working well in opening a door to these people who cannot be heard or are poorly heard in their countries, who have not been concerned the way the national systems of human rights should be working. I think we are facing a crisis, not only in Mexico, but in almost all Latin America, on the functioning of the ombudsmans. And this is why the number of cases, 2,000 just in 1 year, last year, are rising in the Human Rights Commission. The court is working well. The court is also a prestigious institution set in Costa Rica, as you know. This year we will be holding elections for both the commission and the court. 4 out of the 7 members of the commissions will be changed, and 4 of the members of the court will be changed. So there will be elections in the General Assembly in late May or beginning of June, which will be held in Washington, by the way, because Haiti had to resign to being the host country. So there is a renovation in both organs, and there has been a lot of action by NGOs who don't want countries, and I think they are right to say so, and have to not to have just trade-off votes. I'll give you, if you vote for this, I'll give you a vote on that other thing. And no, let's do it on the basis of merits. It is unbelievable that there shouldn't be a woman minister in the court, that it's only a men's court. And so these have made a very interesting process now in who will be selected for these positions in both organs. They will be voted in June, and they'll start their work in January of next year. What are the main issues of this inter-American system? I think there are 3 issues. First is the universality of the documents. Not all member states to the OAS, the United States hasn't, and that's, I think, a very weak point in the international relations, human rights policy of the United States. To claim for human rights, to say that it is Venezuela, down Cuba, a necessity to respect human rights and not sign the Convention on Human Rights. I think it's a contradiction. I tell my American friends in the State Department and my American friends in Congress that that has to be solved. You cannot fight for human rights elsewhere and not sign the convention. It's a contradiction, which has to be solved. It weakens the position of human rights in the United States not to sign that convention. So the universalization of the documents, of the instruments, is one of the issues of the system. Second one is the financement. It is incredible what these people, the judges and the commissioners, can do with such little money. This avoids having a permanent Inter-American Commission throughout the year. And this is why they only meet twice a year, one in March, one in October, and maybe a third one if a country offers as host country for an extraordinary session like we had in Mexico last year. But you cannot live with very insignificant salaries, which force you to take academic posts to have a better income. Most of commissioners are academicians. They work at university. The new appointed commissioner from the United States, James Cavallaro, works at Stanford. and has to divide himself between being concerned on human rights and teach in Stanford, so as other of the commissioners, because they are poorly paid. Of the 80 million budget, only the 10%, 8 million go to the system. I don't really know how they can do it with such a poor income, not only the commissioners and the ministers, but all the people that work in the system. So we have to solve that problem, and that was part of the strategic vision. We have to solve it not with a specific contributory funds, like they come from Europe or other places, but with a regular fund. If there are special and additional contributions, they're welcome, but they should be solved through the regular fund to give stability to the system. So that's the second issue. And the third issue is compliance with the resolution. Compliance with the precautory measures, compliance with the resolutions of the court, compliance with the informes de fondo, the reports that are made by the resolution, compliance with the reports that are the results of the visits in loco in the countries, and the reports of the specific reporters of the commission. That is another issue which we haven't been able to solve. If we can solve in the next years these three issues, then we will have a very strong inter-American human rights system. And this is against a situation in which several countries feel unease with the system, that eventually has to tell their governments, you're wrong, you violated human rights. And these countries are seeking more of a system that procures human rights, but do not apply legislation on human rights. Just the procurement, but not the resolutory phase. That's not really defending human rights if we come into that situation. And that they want to pull out the commission from Washington and bring it elsewhere just to weaken it. So these are the major issues of the system. The system ought to be more focused on real problems that threaten the personal integrity or the specific situation of human beings whose human rights are violated, but not every issue. And I mention this because very recently, for example, the Commission dictated precautory measures in a civil case in Mexico. In a civil case between a husband and a wife the husband they divorced, he took the children and he wouldn't allow the mother to see them, so they accused the tribunals in Mexico for not allowing the mother to see the children. But in the end, it was a civil case, and I think the commission loses sight and strength if it opens so much in dealing with almost every case it comes to them. I think it should be more selective on real threats to human rights. My guess is that Mr. Almagro will also be at pains in modernizing the system. He has committed himself publicly to human rights. In every forum that he has spoken, he openly said he would be committed to the defense of the system of human rights. I hope he does it, particularly in a continent in the South where there is not too much belief in the system of human rights. We changed our policy upon the reform of 2011, where we established that the Constitution was at the same level of international treaties, and we established this principle of conventionality control. Is that correctly said?
There is no English phrase. Control of conventionality are words, but without explaining what they mean, they have no significance in English.
Which means that all judges are obliged to apply the human rights conventions and treaties. And so that's the situation in Mexico. I acknowledge that we are undergoing a serious crisis in human rights. The result being of the weakening of the Human Rights Commission, the National Human Rights Commission in Mexico, which I strongly believe it will change because they just appointed a new ombudsman who has a different outlook than the previous two ones, and also due to the war to the drug lords, which was expanded in the Calderon administration. I think those are the two factors, not the only ones, but the two main factors that have weakened human rights in my country. And now with the Ayotzinapa case, this situation came into a very, very crisis, out of which I hope that we can rebuild the system and strengthening human rights in my country. I think I overdid in my time, I'm sorry, and I'm at your disposal for your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, I thought we had invited Ambassador Rabasa to speak with you. It turns out we've invited Ambassador Quixote. Not only did he persuade the OAS member states to adopt a strategic vision for the OAS, but now he says that we'll be in much better shape if within the next year we can get the United States to ratify the American Convention. We can get the governments of the OAS to up the budget and their contributions, and we can get countries to comply with the resolutions of the Commission and the Court. If all those are achieved, you will truly be Ambassador Cervantes in this case. Ambassador Rabasa has agreed to answer questions on any topic, no holds barred, so feel free to go ahead. Blessing?
Yes, please.
My question relates to the role of the OAS General Assembly of making an oversight on the compliance of the judgments of the court, of the American court. The observation which has been made is that the courts, they make their annual submissions to the OAS General Assembly with specifics on the cases on which the states have not complied with the judgments, but there is nothing much which the General Assembly is doing to ensure that the states complies with the judgment of the court. What is your comment on this?
You are absolutely right in that judgment. I totally coincide with your insight. Yes, they think so far the court believes that if it brings all the cases, a report and the non-compliance cases to the General Assembly, they will make it almost automatically force the state to comply with them, and this is not the case. They come to the General Assembly, they present a report in the General Assembly, they even present a report to the Permanent Council, but then there isn't any mechanism to follow up in the states, within the states, from the inter-American system to see that those court resolutions, or for the case also the resolutions of the Commission, be complied with. We haven't found a way in the convention, and I think this would be part of the homework of the new era of Mr. Almagro, to see that countries comply with those resolutions. Either they bluntly do not comply with them, such as the case of Venezuela, for example, who even denounced the convention, or they say they are complying with it, but it takes years before they fully complied with the resolution. And the way this has been done through the General Assembly has not been effective. I totally agree with you. We have to put our thinking caps in the next months to see that we have to find a way. I don't know if urging national states to change their domestic legislation. I think Colombia has done so, but I'm not too sure if some other country also, to ensure that the resolutions of the international organizations are complied by the country. But we have to find a more strong way to make compliance. And it is not only through the General Assembly, unfortunately.
Ambassador, you mentioned on the way down that Mexico is developing a new internal mechanism to facilitate processing cases before the Inter-American system. Could you say something about that, and whether it might touch on the issue that Blessing just raised, namely also compliance?
The Peña government has been, even before Ayotzinapa, but more so with Ayotzinapa, very much concerned on the cases that are brought into the American or Inter-American system or the United States system for the case being. And it has urged us, the Ministry of Interior, the Attorney General Office, and the Foreign Ministry, all of them that have departments of human rights, to build up a mechanism where all the cases that are being brought to the Inter-American system and that have been admitted, that have been accepted, are worked by the governors and by the human rights local commissions even before they come to a public hearing or after a public hearing. But the idea is to put behind all the strength of the executive office with the governments of the state, governors of the state, in saying, for example, Oaxaca, you've got 10 cases in the Human Rights Commission in Washington. How are you going to deal with them? What are you going to do about them? Regardless if they developed into a public hearing, a informe de fondo, or go to the court. I want you to tell me and give me a calendar of complying with this situation. So I think this is very important. Mexico is taking further steps in trying to reshape the human rights system.
And another unusual step you recently took, you mentioned the, I could never pronounce it, Ayotzinapa case in Guerrero where 47 young students were arrested by the police and apparently turned over to organized crime and are disappeared and presumed dead. And Mexico, and I'm sure you must have been at the center of these discussions, in last November agreed to have the Inter-American Commission appoint a group of 5 experts who are, I think, are in Mexico right now. Could you, that's a very unusual technique. I wonder if you could say something about that.
Yes, of course. When I was a commissioner for the peace talk with the Zapatistas, that was in Mr. Cedillo's regime, there were interests of several international organizations, United Nations, OAS, Red Cross, etc., to sort of participate in dealing with the matter, with the problem, in a way of mediating. And at that time, my government, who had just very recently accepted foreign observation of elections, because before we were worse than Venezuela, said, no, that's a sovereign matter. We don't want anyone to come here and observe us. But at that time, I was called by my president and said, I don't want any international organization to be involved in this. This is a national issue. This is a national problem. We will solve it in the best way we can, through dialogue, through politics, not the use of force, but only with our own tools. So 12 years after that, in the Ayotzinapa case, there is a 180 degrees change of governmental policy, and they said, welcome an international organization in helping us with the case. And we signed an agreement for the first time with the OAS. It was my duty to negotiate it between the OAS, the participants, that is the representatives of the Ayotzinapa families, the Agustin Pro organization and others, to come to terms with an agreement which was called Technical Assistance Agreement, by which 5 experts chosen by the commission. There are 2 from Colombia, 1 from Guatemala, 1 from Spain, and another 1 or 2 from Guatemala, don't remember quite, were designated to go to Mexico and check on the all the proceedings made by the general attorney to see if they stand to international standards in the investigation of crime, in the search for disappeared people, and in the assistance to victims. They are already in Mexico. It was my duty to see that they had all facilities to do their work. We put money into that program, $1 million, for all the expenses that these 5 people incurred on, and they are working there. So it is certainly, as Doc mentioned, a sort of a landmark, because just 12 years before, there was no way an international organization would be involved in a domestic matter. And this way, we will not only involve the OAS, but we open the door also to the Argentinian forensic group, and accepted that if the United States or Germany wanted to help, they would be welcome. So it's a change of a policy, yes, for the better, I think.
Sean O'Brien teaches a class here on human rights practice to our LLMs, and the course is going on right now. In the car on the way down, you were telling me about the very beginning of the Mexican Human Rights Commission, which was 88 or, 88, was it?
In the 80s, yes, with President Salinas.
And Jorge Carpizo, the great Mexican human rights advocate and diplomat, was the first commissioner of human rights, and you were his senior assistant. And the very first case that came through, or came out of the commission with a recommendation, was directed to the military. How did Jorge Carpizo decide to handle that case?
Jorge Carpizo, for those of you who didn't know him, was a very special person. You know, he was a fully UNAM product, for which he was proud. He became director of the Institute of Legal Studies in UNAM, and then became dean of the UNAM, from which he then went to ombudsman, convinced President Salinas to create an ombudsman to protect human rights in Mexico, because there was the protection of the normal courts could last many, many years, and these recommendations were 1 week, 2 weeks after the claim was presented. So he convinced the president to create the ombudsman, and he had to tell the president that this didn't mean makeup, that it was real talk, that this meant changing a reality in a situation in a country where torture was practiced in different ways. I don't know if any of you gentlemen or ladies have ever been in the Supreme Court in Mexico. Have any of you been there? No? In the Supreme Court in Mexico, in the main building of the Supreme Court in Mexico, some president of the Supreme Court had an idea to call a muralist. You know, Mexico is a tradition of muralists, Diego Rivera, Siqueiros, etc., to paint a mural in the staircase leading of the 4 floors of the building. And they wanted him to paint a very strong and powerful mural. So he said, all right, I'll do it, but I have to have absolute freedom of my art expression. He said, yes. So he painted in that mural, and it's absolutely impressive, all the ways that torture was used in getting someone to confess something that he or she hadn't done. Like suffocating, like bringing a dog, like putting the face in toilets, etc., etc. So it was a country really, really where torture, among other human rights violations, was generalized. So convincing the president wasn't easy, but when he convinced the president and he meant it's not going to be a makeup, it's going to be a real thing, he meant it. He meant it. We have to touch upon certain areas that so far have been somehow untouchable. And then it came the case with the military. And when he issued the first recommendation, he spoke to the president and he said, I'm going to issue this recommendation, but I want to have a meeting with the minister to explain him why it is important for the military to accept a recommendation from the Ombudsman of Mexico. Why it would be even to their own advantage and strengthen to accept that there has been human rights violations committed by someone in the military, and he did so, and he went through with the recommendation, and that started open a door, and now even the militaries have their own human rights department, and now they have to comply with human rights recommendations from the Commission or from the Commission, Inter-American Commission. But that has how Carpizo would manage to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Our time has expired. Thanks to all of you for coming out, and let's hear a round of applause.
Thank you very much.